Hi, I'm Dave Cannon, fish biologist, and I live here in Aniak now. I used to be the Yukon Delta National Wildlife Refuge fish biologist back in 1998. I left there in 2002, moved here to Aniak, worked with the Kuskokwim Native Association and also eventually Native Village Napaimute and the Kuskokwim River Watershed Council. I wished I could be here in person, but I'm up on the Aniak and Salmon Rivers floating with 20-some students from around the region on the math science expedition. But I wanted to express some of my concerns with the proposed Donlin gold mine. It's going to be potentially the world's largest mine, and there's going to come trade-offs with that huge project, and that's exactly what I want to talk to you about here. Now, my biggest concern, and the concern that everybody should probably have in the region, is that when the project is done and the pit lake, which is going to be 3 miles long, 1,800 feet deep, going to be a big lake that's going to take roughly 50 years to fill with snow melt and rainwater. Once the mine is done, that's going to have to be treated. All the water that flows out of there into Crooked Creek is going to have to be treated forever. And how significant is that? Well, this will be the first mine approved in the state of Alaska that will have water treatment into perpetuity. And again, that's forever. There's going to be a water treatment plant that's going to treat water and put it back into Crooked Creek, and there's nothing to say that over time there won't be some malfunction in that water treatment facility. Forever is a long time. Now, besides water treatment into perpetuity, one of my other major concerns has to do with the smelt of the Kuskokwim. And we're dealing with a fairly unique population, for such a big river system. As everybody knows, they all come in more or less at one time, migrate upriver, and then they spawn in the vicinity of Upper and Lower Calskag. And all of them, within a day or two of spawning, head back downriver. And then those eggs are lying on the substrates and take roughly 18 days to develop, depending on the water temperature. And so there's great concern, especially during low water years. And you can see in this graph here, we've had low water at least 5 of the last 10 years. And here's what the final EIS actually says. During the 2015 Rainbow Smelt Spawning Survey, spawning occurred as shallow as 8.7 feet along a relatively confined channel segment, and that's key, along a confined channel segment. The propeller scour of passing tug traffic in such locations could have resulted in detectable incidents of injury or mortality to incubating fish eggs or population level. And that's also key, population level effects, the entire population, depending on the tug's horsepower rating and engine speed. And we are going to see tugs the size that we've never seen before. Very large tugs pushing those 4 barges at a time. Because the relatively shallow depth across this particular channel segment, it's unlikely that impacts to incubating rainbow smelt eggs could have been avoided by altering the line of travel of barge traffic. Now, that's important. There was a study done in 2014 as well as 2015 where the scientists documented exactly where the smelt spawned and in what depth the eggs were found. And there's a graphic here that shows the water depth across that channel where that relatively confined channel that those fish spawned that year, and why during that low water year, even though the tugs and the barges would go in the deepest section of the channel, they weren't going to totally be able to miss eggs. And so it does say, scouring could displace, injure, or cause mortalities to eggs of anadromous rainbow smelt. And you're going to see in this graphic, this is a poster that Donlin folks put out 2 years ago or less, I believe it was, that states that there aren't going to be significant impacts to the smelt. But I, as well as a few other biologists, would argue that point. We are very concerned that over the life of the mine, knowing that we've seen many, many low water years, there could be quite a few during the mine life that could, over time, affect that whole population at the population level of smelt in the Kuskokwim, a negative impact on them. And right now, you're going to hear something that was on KYUK, and it is the Yupik word of the week.
Kuzurit, smelts. Kuzurit, smelts. Kuzurit nantat. Where are the smelts? Kuzurit. Kuzurit.
And I'm afraid that down the road, over 30 years, whatever the mine life is, that people may be asking that question, where are the smelt? But not regarding when they're coming up and going to hit each village. The fact that maybe they're not there in near the numbers that they used to be. Now I do know numerous people who work for Donlin that are sincere about trying to do this project right. But when it's all said and done, I wonder, does Donlin Gold really have our best interest in mind? And you know, you've heard hundreds of times, like on this KYUK clip for the birthday call-in line.
Support for Birthday Call-In is provided by Donlin Gold, committed to creating a safe and environmentally responsible mining project.
But this gives me cause for concern. And what this is this is a letter that was submitted by Donlin Gold by Stan Fu back in March of 2013. And it was part of the scoping process. And this is in regards to basically potential catastrophic events. And here's what Stan Fu wrote to the Army Corps of Engineers. This letter contains scoping comments prepared by Donlin Gold, LLC, for consideration by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in developing the scope of the Donlin Gold Project Environmental Impact Statement. The purpose of scoping is to help the Corps and cooperating agencies determine the significant environmental issues to be analyzed in the EIS, the range of alternatives to be assessed, potential future projects that could have cumulative impacts, cumulative meaning several different impacts coalescing into one bigger impact, and existing environmental data to be used in the EIS. And then catastrophic events is the title here. He goes on to say, some participants at the scoping meeting stated that the EIS needs to address catastrophic failures such as pipeline breaks or dam failures. Things like a tailings dam failure, okay? And I gotta be honest, I was one of those people that expressed the need to look at and consider catastrophic failures. It says, in considering the extent to which issues such as these should be addressed in the EIS, if at all, we encourage the Corps to give due consideration to those impacts which are foreseeable and essential to the consideration of alternatives versus those which are remote and highly speculative. So Stan is saying that a dam failure up there on behind Crooked Creek from this mine is highly speculative. He says, for example, we know of no other EIS that evaluated impacts due to tailings dam failure, and we think that scenario should not be evaluated in the Donlin Gold EIS. And it was a little over a year and a half from Stan's letter that the Mount Poly mine tailings dam collapsed and sent all kinds of toxic materials into a pristine lake. And then maybe a year after that, there was another major dam failure down in South America. And both relatively modern mines. So, for Stan or anybody from Donlin to guarantee us that there wouldn't be a catastrophic failure up here at the Donlin site, I think is totally misguided. And we, the people here, need to understand what the trade-offs will be if, one, the mine goes through, and two, there are some type of catastrophic failure that does occur. Now, I've been accused of being an obstructionist for expressing my concerns for the Donlin project, but here's someone who shares my views, and he's a miner. His name's Robert Fithian, and he's very familiar with the Upper Kuskokwim. Here's a little bit about him. He's built or enhanced airfields for large aircraft use, roads, and provided substantial logistical and contract mining services support for mines within the Upper Kuskokwim region. He's owned and operated or provided contract mining services to many mines throughout Alaska, and he's also worked on the two largest mines in the world. He has provided leadership within the Alaska mining industry by serving terms within the Alaska Miners Association Board of Directors, and he served as the membership elected statewide president.
My name's Robert Fithian. I am a professional guide. I've been guiding here in the Upper Kuskokwim for the past 35 years or so. I'm also a miner, contract hard rock miner, owner and operator of several mines in Alaska, historically building a new mine as we speak, and a yak rancher, have a ranch in the interior in the Copper River Basin where we raise Himalayan yaks and hay. And we're here today to talk about the Donlin pipeline here in the Upper Kuskokwim and its impacts on this region.
Now, what mine is it now you operate down in southeast? Where is it?
I'm building a new mine called the Dawson Mine on Prince of Wales Island near Hollis.
Now, Robert, you and I, we've had a discussion, and we tend to see things similarly as far as the environmental impact statement process. And I think we both agree that in several ways the process has failed the people of the Kuskokwim. So do you want to give your thoughts on that?
Well, thank you, Dave. Yes. The EIS process was something I wanted to allow to work. I was discouraged in seeing the potential impact on the region that the pipeline was going to bring forward, but I felt like I needed to work within the process. I had enough respect for Alaska and our system and process and public input and the important things that I felt were the respect for people, the respect for the wildlife resources, the respect for the ways of life that exist in regions, that the EIS would capture those and make adjustments to the proposed plan of operations. So I submitted comments, a number of comments through the whole of the process during the scoping and in the final end, and they were substantive, they were technical, they were from the heart. They talked about the culture of the region, they talked about the people's use of the region, they talked about our way of life, the importance of conservation, and they were always encouraging a focus to viable alternatives, moving the pipeline out into the floor of the valley. But they weren't received well, and the comments through the scoping phase were summarily dismissed as not applicable. All of the comments from the most impacted village of the whole up here in the Upper Kuskokwim, the Nikolai people, all of their comments that were submitted through the whole process were also dismissed as non-applicable. And then the final EIS came out, and the EIS was supposed to seek public input and then make alternatives to the project accordingly, but unfortunately there were no alternatives granted to this side of the range, and there were no alternatives to my knowledge that came from public input. There was several alternatives that came from the operators' concerns about being able to effectively develop the project, but there were no alternatives considered within the EIS, or well, not considered but adopted within the EIS or recommended. So,
Robert, you have expressed some concerns with the pipeline, specifically here in the upper Kuskokwim region. What are those concerns?
well, Alaska has a challenge, Dave. It's a challenge as old as mankind, really, or modern mankind, and the challenge to find a balance between development and conservation. And truly, the pipeline that, as proposed for the natural gas to support the Donlin Creek mine downriver, as proposed, they lay it across the front of the Alaska Range over here for about 70 miles between mile 150 and 220 of the 315-mile pipeline. And that region there is an incredible wildlife habitat. It was actually, portions of that were selected for Denali National Park historically under ANILCA, and the pipeline as proposed cuts right across a really important segment of that habitat related to the transitional region between the valley floor, the frozen spruce forest, and the upland regions, and we call that the transitional habitat. Really important wildlife habitat relative to wildlife conservation. So the pipeline as proposed is the shortest, quickest, cheapest, easiest way to get to the Donlin mine from Anchorage, and I believe there's been a conservation failure in that selection process for the pipeline.
Now, these were just some of my concerns that I have for the Donlin project, but you are going to have to make the decision whether or not the trade-offs are worth it. And I hope you just make an informed decision.